One other practice which comes in for sharp criticism in the Quran is that of infanticide, and I'd like you to look at the Quran. That's pages 747 and 748. We read the Arabic, it's verses 58 to 59. وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ مِنْ سُوءِ مَا بُشِّرَ بِهِ أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى هُونٍ أَمْ يَدُسُّهُ فِي التُّرَابِ أَلَا سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ. When news is brought to one of them of the birth of a female child, his face darkens and he is filled with inward grief. With shame does he hide himself from his people because of the bad news he has had. Shall he retain it on sufferance and contempt? This is the debate that goes on inside his mind. Shall he retain it on sufferance and contempt, or bury it in the dust? Ah, what an evil choice they decide on. Before I comment on this, one more passage, a short one, and that is page 1500. At the top, verses 17 to 18. وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِمَا ضَرَبَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ مَثَلًا ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ أَوَمَنْ يُنَشَّأُ فِي الْحِلْيَةِ وَهُوَ فِي الْخِصَامِ غَيْرُ مُبِينٍ. When news is brought to one of them of the birth of what he sets up as a likeness to Allah, that is, the Arabs called the angels the daughters of God. So they themselves would rather have sons, but to God they would attribute daughters. Not that the Quran is saying they should attribute sons to God also and have some of the women attributed to themselves. This is a concessive criticism. That is, all right, if this is what you do, then this is a very unfair division. In a satirical way, the Quran is saying, you would like to have sons for yourselves, and you would give daughters to God, angels being, in their view, the daughters of God. So when news is brought to one of them of the birth of what he sets up as a likeness to Allah, most gracious, his face darkens, and he is filled with inward grief. Same phrase that we read earlier. Is then one brought up among trinkets and unable to give a clear account in a dispute to be associated with Allah? This second verse, 18, I'll explain shortly because I think it is often misunderstood even by Muslims. I don't say that presumptuously, but I think it has another meaning than the one usually assigned to it. First, these two passages which we just read. Infanticide in pre-Islam. Why? Well, there were two main reasons why the Arabs, and not all Arabs, by the way, one has to be fair, not all Arabs practiced infanticide, but several tribes did, and the Quran found it totally unacceptable. Two main reasons. One, since there was no central political authority in Arabia, every tribe was a law unto itself, and fighting and feuding was very common. to gain control of resources, limited resources of nature. Water, for example, fodder for the animals. In this situation, raids were quite common, and in these raids, women were captured and they were treated with humiliation. One poet speaks of mankuhatin ghayre mamhuratin. There's many a woman that I married without paying her the bride price. What he means is that I captured, I'm a brave warrior, I've been to battle very often, I've captured many women, and I've held them as concubines, and I didn't have to pay any bride price to the families of those women. So women were often captured in war, and some people were afraid that if, especially weak tribes, that if our tribe is raided and women are captured, they'll be mistreated. Remember, the very first day when I read a few verses from that poet, one verse was ala atharina bidun hisanun nuhaziru an tuqassama aw tahuna. When we go to the battlefield, accompanying us are beautiful women, and we are afraid that if we lose this battle, they'll be captured by the enemy. There are several other verses that go along with that verse, and one of them is yaqutna jiyadana wa yaqulna lastum bu'ulatana iza lam tamna'una. They feed our horses in the battlefield just before battle starts and say to us, you are no husbands to us if you do not protect us against the enemy. So women usually accompanied men to the battlefield so as to motivate them to fight the more courageously, because otherwise these women will be captured by and distributed among the enemy troops.
Were men not captured also?
Yes, men were captured, but see, they were enslaved like women, but in a tribal society, the capture of a man and the capture of a woman is not the same. If someone captures the women of your tribe, that's a matter of great shame. So it means you failed to protect them, and you proved to be weak. So you're no men, you lack manliness. So you're not worthy of being called the defenders of the tribe. The tribe had to be defended above everything else.
So the marital status of women who were captured was irrelevant to those who did the capturing.
Yes, I mean they
divorced. They didn't have to be divorced in order to become a wife of a second
They were
person.
simply concubines, and they could be traded and treated as the captors wished, right? The second thing is that the Arabs regarded women as persons who could play no part in defending the tribe in any sense of the word. And verse number 18 here in the second passage is relevant. Let me read this. Is then one brought up among trinkets and unable to give a clear account in a dispute to be associated with Allah? First of all, this verse is to be taken as a statement made by the person who has been given the news that a female child has been born in his family. So it is in continuation with the preceding verse. You know, the preceding verse ends at this. His face darkens and he is filled with inward grief. You note those words? So as that person is filled with inward grief, this thought comes to his mind and says, my goodness, who is born to me? Is it one who will have to be raised in Hilya? This translation is very, very inaccurate. The word is not trinkets. The word is jewelry. So this man is saying to himself, my goodness, there's born into my house one, a girl, who will have to be brought up in jewelry. That is, I will have to buy jewelry for her. She will be a liability. But on the other hand, she will be very weak and inarticulate in Khisam. This is a very key word, and it's not usually understood. I'll write the Arabic word. Khisam actually means confrontation. This is the literal meaning of the word Khisam and not simply dispute. Khisam in Arabian culture was of two types. One was war, and women, it was believed, could not go to war and win a battle for you. So they are weak as far as this type of Khisam or confrontation was concerned. War. See, it's not simply dispute, it's war. And the second type of Khisam was poetry competition, and not simply a symposium of poetry. You, as the chief poet of your tribe, had to literally contend with the poets of the other tribes, with whom you were at war. So either there was hot war, shooting war, or cold war. So what the Quran is saying, that this man to whom news has been brought that he has become the father of a girl, he says to himself, a woman, a girl, who will not be able to help me or our tribe either in a hot war or in a cold war, because poetry was the medium. See, it was all psychological propaganda was carried on in the form of and through the medium of poetry. And once again, I think I'm making too much use of the passage I read the first day, but if you remember that, there's great boasting that we have demolished our enemies in the past, and therefore, oh, Amr the prince, you have no right to demand service of us. How dare you humiliate me and my mother? So in that long poem, he gives a long list of the exploits of his own tribe, taking pride in those exploits, and then condemning and satirizing other tribes. This is a fine example of the Khisam that the Quran is referring to. Okay? I'll just write the word poetry, but it is to be understood in the sense in which I have explained it. So, in brief then, this man says, one who will have to be brought up in jewelry and who will prove very inarticulate. That's a little meaning of the word ghair mubin. Instead of saying to give a clear account, that perhaps will pass, but literally inarticulate. A woman would not be able to articulate herself in poetry and then prove her mettle in war. So, in a word, women are a liability and not an asset. A liability, but not an asset. This was the second reason why some of the Arab tribes practiced infanticide.